The telegram arrived on a Tuesday morning, and Henry Mancini almost did not open it. He had been sitting in the same chair for 3 days, barely moving, barely eating, the kind of stillness that descends on a person after they bury their father and realize the world has no interest in pausing for their grief. The piano in the corner of his studio had not been touched in 2 weeks. Sheet music sat in piles where he had left it before the funeral, already feeling like artifacts from someone else's life, from a version of himself that still believed music was the most important problem he had to solve. He opened the telegram because it had Audrey Hepburn's name on it. It was 1966, 5 years after Moon River, and they had not worked together since. He unfolded the paper and read it, standing in the hallway, still in his bathrobe, and then he read it again. "Dearest Hank, please won't you do the music? Couldn't imagine anyone else but you scoring." That was all. No pleasantries, no preamble, no paragraph explaining the film or the role or why she thought of him. Just Audrey, writing the way she always spoke, with a directness so quiet it barely registered as force until after the fact, until you were already saying yes before you understood why. Mancini set the telegram on the kitchen table and did not call back for 3 days. In 40 years of working in Hollywood, no actor had ever personally asked him to write for a film. Directors asked, producers asked, agents called and negotiated and circled. But not this. Not a telegram from an actress, handwritten, saying she couldn't imagine anyone else. He didn't know what to do with that kind of trust when he could barely get out of his chair. Trust has a weight when it arrives in the wrong season. It asks something of you that grief is not sure it can provide. He finally called Stanley Donen on a Thursday and told him he was listening. Donen sent the script immediately. Mancini read it in one sitting and called Donen back the same evening with 3 words: "I can't make head or tail of this." The screenplay for Two for the Road jumped between 5 different time periods without clearly marking them, cutting from a crumbling marriage in 1966 to a honeymoon in 1957 to a first meeting to an affair and back again, with nothing to orient you except the clothes the characters wore and the cars they drove. It was deliberate and sophisticated and completely disorienting, and Mancini had no idea how you composed a score for something that was already 4 things at once, living in 4 different emotional registers simultaneously, refusing to be located in a single feeling. "When you see it on screen," Donen said, "it will be much more obvious." Mancini was not convinced, but Audrey had sent a telegram, so he said yes. What Mancini did not fully know, what almost nobody on the outside understood, was what was happening inside Audrey's life during exactly the same period. Her marriage to Mel Ferrer had been deteriorating for years. 2 careers pulling in opposite directions, the relentless weight of public life pressing down on things too private to survive the pressure, the miscarriages that left their mark on a body and a soul in ways that don't show on film, the silences that accumulate between 2 people when there is too much that cannot be said. By the time Two for the Road began shooting in the south of France in 1966, the marriage was not in crisis. It was in its final chapter. Audrey knew it. She was being asked to play a woman watching her marriage dissolve while her own marriage was dissolving, and she brought to that assignment the kind of precision that only comes from people who have learned, very young, that the most important things sometimes require a performance. Not fakery, performance. The disciplined act of continuing when every instinct says, stop. Mancini watched the rough cut in a small screening room in London in the autumn of 1966. Donen sat beside him. Nobody else was present. Mancini had expected to watch a film. Instead, he watched something that felt closer to a private document. Footage of a woman in the act of surviving something she had not yet survived, captured by a camera that did not know the difference between what was scripted and what was not, and therefore caught both with equal clarity. The non-linear structure that had seemed like an unsolvable puzzle on the page revealed itself on screen as something emotionally precise. The film was not telling the story of a marriage in any conventional sense. It was showing how memory behaves inside a long relationship. The way a couple driving through France in 1966 will suddenly find themselves back in 1955 without choosing to go there. The way a single sentence carries a decade of tenderness or damage depending on the year it was said. The way love does not end cleanly, but leaves pieces of itself scattered across time, like objects dropped on a long walk. And at the center of all of it was Audrey. He watched her and saw something he had not prepared himself for. She was not performing Joanna Wallace. She was somewhere else, somewhere real, and the camera was finding her there without asking permission. There were moments of such unguarded sorrow that Mancini found himself looking slightly away from the screen, the way you look away from something that was not meant to be witnessed. Whatever Joanna felt, Audrey felt, and Audrey was feeling things that went far past what any script had put on the page. She had taken whatever was happening inside her actual life and placed it directly into the film, without the usual translation into craft and technique, without the normal professional distance that separates a performance from a confession. When the screening ended, Mancini sat in the dark for a long time without speaking. Donen did not rush him. He understood that something had occurred in the room that needed space around it before it could become language. Mancini finally stood and said very quietly that he knew what the score needed to be. He did not explain further. He did not need to. He went back to his hotel room that night and did not sleep. He sat at the small, upright piano in the corner and worked until morning, the way he worked when something was pulling him faster than his conscious mind could follow. The main theme came quickly. Not triumphant, not sweeping, not the kind of orchestral declaration that studios expected from romantic films. It was something suspended between joy and loss, a melody that could not decide if it was looking forward or backward, because it was doing both at the same time. It moved the way a car moves through landscape you love and are already leaving, fast enough to keep going, slow enough to see everything you are losing. He knew before he finished the first pass that it was the best work he had ever done. Not the most famous, the best. But the thing he could never fully explain afterward was not the main theme. There was another piece. He wrote it separately, outside the formal scoring process, not assigned to any specific scene. He wrote it because he could not stop seeing what he had seen in that screening room. What it meant to carry your actual grief onto a film set and offer it to a camera as something called a performance. When it was not performance at all, when it was simply you, with nowhere left to hide, trusting the process enough to stay in the frame. He thought about the telegram that had arrived on a Tuesday morning when he could not get out of his chair. He thought about what it cost her to ask someone for something, directly, by name, in writing, when she was already carrying everything she was carrying. He titled the piece, Something for Audrey. It was not complicated, a little over 2 minutes, built on a simple descending melody that never quite resolved the way you expected, that arrived at something close to an answer and then moved past it, gently, without insisting. It appeared briefly in the finished film, almost incidentally, and was not included on the original soundtrack release. Most people who saw Two for the Road never noticed it was there. Mancini rarely spoke about it in interviews, not because it was minor work, because it was the most personal thing he had ever put on paper, and personal things resist the language of promotion. It was not a love song, not a portrait, not a tribute in any conventional sense. It was closer to an acknowledgement. A man sitting alone at a piano in a London hotel room, trying to say to someone who would never hear it directly, I see what you are carrying right now. I don't fully understand it, but I see it, and I found the only language I have to say so. The British premiere of Two for the Road was held at the Odeon Leicester Square on the 31st of August, 1967. A proper event, cameras and noise and the particular controlled chaos that attends a Hollywood premiere in London. Audrey was there. She looked, as she always looked at such things, as though none of it was touching her. As though she had somehow learned to be present and protected at the same time, a skill that took most people their entire lives, and that she had developed by necessity, very young, in circumstances that had nothing to do with cinema. That same day, she and Mel Ferrer released a statement to the press. After 14 years, they were separating. Mancini learned about it that evening, after the premiere screening. He did not speak about it publicly, not then and not for many years afterward. There was nothing adequate to say. The film about a marriage unraveling had opened on the precise day Audrey's marriage officially unraveled. The music he had written because of her, the theme he called his finest work, and the small private piece that barely anyone heard had been playing in a darkened theater on Leicester Square while her actual life was changing in the lobby. He sat with that fact for a long time and did not try to make it into something meaningful or symbolic, because it already was those things, and adding words would only diminish them. In every interview that followed, across the remaining decades of his career, Mancini answered questions about Moon River with grace and completeness. He understood what that song meant to people, and he respected it. But when he was asked about the work he was most proud of, he did not say Moon River. He said Two for the Road. Every time without hesitation, and the people who asked always seemed slightly surprised, as though they expected the famous answer, the award-winning answer, the answer everyone already knew. He never explained at length. He would say it was the most difficult score of his career and the one that meant the most, and then he would let the subject move elsewhere, because some things do not survive extended explanation. Some things live in the space between what you can say and what you can only play. He kept a handwritten copy of the Something for Audrey score in the same wooden box where he stored the Moon River manuscript. He showed the Moon River pages to young composers who came to him for advice. He showed the other pages to almost no one, not because they were lesser work, because they were not that kind of document. Some things you create for an audience. Some things you create because there is no other container for what you need to hold. Some things do their work quietly, inside a wooden box in a studio, simply by existing, by being proof that someone understood something true about another person and found, in the only language available, a way to say so. Have you ever made something for someone that they never knew was made for them? Have you ever loved someone's courage so quietly that the only thing left to do was write it down and keep it and say nothing? Tell us in the comments, because that is what was inside the box. That is the story behind the music nobody ever heard.